What if one of the most important foods in human history simply vanished, and almost nobody noticed? What if the key to feeding entire civilizations is something we chose to forget? There was a time when survival didn't depend on supermarkets, refrigeration, or global supply chains. Entire civilizations thrived on simple systems, built around crops that were reliable, resilient, and deeply connected to the land. But somewhere along the way, something changed. Some of the most powerful foods that once sustained millions quietly disappeared from our daily lives. In this video, you're going to discover the story of a forgotten vegetable that once fed entire populations, supported economies, and shaped the way people lived. More importantly, you'll understand why it disappeared, what made it so valuable, and what that reveals about the way we grow and consume food today. If you're interested in gardening, self-sufficiency, or simply understanding how the past can change the way you see food today, this video will open your eyes in a way you probably didn't expect. Before we go deeper, take a second to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with one question. What is one food you think humanity depends on today? Because by the end of this video, that answer might change. Now let's go back to a time when food wasn't just something you bought. It was something that defined entire civilizations. Long before modern agriculture simplified what we eat, entire civilizations depended on a small group of crops that could survive harsh conditions, feed large populations, and store well over time. Among these was a now forgotten vegetable that once held incredible importance. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't rare, and it didn't need perfect conditions to grow. But that was exactly its strength. This vegetable thrived where others failed. Poor soil, unpredictable weather, limited water, none of these were deal breakers. While many crops demanded attention and precision, this one adapted. It grew quietly, reliably, season after season. And because of that, it became a foundation of survival. Imagine living in a world without refrigeration, no supermarkets, no imported food. Everything you eat depends on what you grow, store, or preserve. In that reality, food isn't just about taste, it's about security. And this vegetable provided exactly that. It could be harvested and kept for long periods without spoiling quickly. It didn't require complex storage systems. In some cases, it could remain in the ground until needed, acting almost like a natural pantry. That meant less pressure to harvest everything at once, and less risk of losing food to spoilage. For entire communities, this changed everything. Instead of worrying about constant crop failure, people had a reliable fallback, a safety net built into the soil itself. But its value went beyond survival. It was versatile. It could be prepared in different ways, combined with other foods, and used to stretch meals further. When resources were scarce, this mattered. A single harvest could feed more people for longer periods with less effort. This efficiency allowed civilizations to stabilize. When food becomes predictable, everything else begins to grow. Populations increase, settlements expand, trade develops. All of this supported quietly by crops that most people today have never even heard of. What's even more surprising is how simple it was to grow. No advanced tools, no chemicals, just knowledge passed down through generations. People understood how to work with nature, not against it. They knew when to plant, when to harvest, and how to let the soil do most of the work. This connection to the land created a kind of balance. Crops weren't forced to grow faster than they should. The soil wasn't pushed beyond its limits. Everything moved at a pace that was sustainable. Now compare that to today. We have more technology than ever, yet we rely on a surprisingly small number of crops, and many of them require constant intervention: fertilizers, controlled environments, long-distance transport. Remove any one part of that system and the whole structure starts to weaken. So the question becomes, how did something so reliable, so efficient, and so essential simply disappear? And more importantly, what did we replace it with? Because to understand why this vegetable vanished, you first need to understand how something so powerful could be forgotten in the first place. To understand why this forgotten vegetable was once so powerful, you need to look at how it was grown, not as a product, but as part of a system. Unlike modern agriculture, which often isolates crops and forces them into controlled environments, this vegetable thrived because it worked with the natural rhythm of the land. It didn't need perfect rows, artificial inputs, or constant monitoring. It was planted in a way that respected the soil's natural structure. Often, it was grown alongside other crops, not separated from them. This created a kind of quiet cooperation underground. The soil stayed healthier, moisture was retained longer, and pests were less likely to destroy entire harvests at once. Think of it like this. Instead of putting all your energy into one fragile system, people spread their risk across multiple layers. This vegetable became one of the most dependable layers in that system. Another reason it was so valuable is how efficiently it used time. While many crops required strict timing for harvest, this one gave flexibility. It could stay in the ground longer without losing its value. In some cases, the soil itself acted like storage, protecting it from temperature swings and slowing down spoilage. That meant fewer losses and less urgency. People didn't have to rush to harvest everything at once. They could take what they needed when they needed it. This reduced waste in a way that feels almost impossible by today's standards. And then there's the energy factor. Modern food systems rely heavily on transportation, refrigeration, and processing. Each step consumes resources. But this vegetable required almost none of that. It grew locally, stayed fresh naturally, and could be consumed with minimal preparation. In simple terms, it gave more while demanding less. This efficiency made it ideal not just for individuals, but for entire communities. When a crop doesn't require constant effort, it frees up time and energy for other things: building, learning, trading. Over time, this creates growth beyond just food. Now compare that to how many people grow food today, especially in urban or suburban environments across the United States. Gardening has often become something controlled, precise, and sometimes even stressful. People worry about perfect soil mixes, exact watering schedules, and protecting fragile plants from every possible threat. But what if one of the most effective solutions wasn't about controlling more, but about stepping back? This forgotten vegetable represents a different mindset, one where resilience mattered more than perfection, where systems were built to survive, not just to produce. And here's where it gets interesting. Because if something this efficient existed, something that required less effort, stored itself naturally, and supported entire populations, why would anyone stop growing it? Why would a system that works so well be replaced by something more complicated, more fragile, and more dependent on external inputs? The answer isn't simple. It wasn't a single decision or a sudden change. It was gradual, almost invisible at first. But once you see what happened next, you start to realize that this wasn't just about a vegetable disappearing. It was about a shift in how we think about food itself. The disappearance of this vegetable didn't happen overnight. There was no single moment when people decided to stop growing it. Instead, it faded slowly, almost silently, as the world around it began to change. As populations grew and societies expanded, food systems started to shift. What once worked on a local, natural level began to be replaced by systems designed for scale, speed, and uniformity. The focus moved away from resilience and toward efficiency, but not the kind of efficiency that protects the soil or supports long-term survival. A different kind, one that prioritizes output, appearance, and transport. Crops that were easy to store in the ground, that didn't require much attention, didn't always fit into this new model. They weren't ideal for long-distance shipping. They didn't always look the same from one harvest to another, and they didn't rely on systems that could be controlled or standardized. So, over time, they were replaced. Farmers began to favor crops that could be harvested all at once, packaged quickly, and transported across long distances without too much variation. Supermarkets needed consistency. Consumers got used to seeing the same shape, the same size, the same color, every single time. This is where something important was lost. Because when food becomes standardized, diversity starts to disappear. And with that diversity goes resilience. The more we depend on a narrow selection of crops, the more fragile the system becomes. At the same time, knowledge began to fade. The methods used to grow, harvest, and store these older crops weren't written down in manuals or taught in modern systems. They were passed from person to person, generation to generation. When those chains were broken, the knowledge went with them. Now fast forward to today. In many parts of the United States, people are starting to feel the effects of this shift, even if they don't fully realize it. Rising food costs, supply chain disruptions, and concerns about food quality are becoming more common. And in response, more people are turning back to gardening, homesteading, and self-sufficiency. But here's the problem. Many are trying to rebuild these systems using only modern knowledge. They focus on tools, products, and techniques that often recreate the same fragile systems they're trying to escape from. What's missing is the deeper understanding that older methods were built on. The idea that food systems should be stable even when conditions aren't perfect. That crops should work with the environment, not depend on constant correction. That sometimes the most powerful solutions are the simplest ones. This forgotten vegetable is a symbol of that mindset. It represents a time when survival wasn't based on controlling nature, but on understanding it. And maybe the reason it disappeared isn't because it stopped working, but because we stopped paying attention to what actually works. So now the question changes. It's no longer just about what we lost. It's about what we might still be able to recover, if we're willing to look back and learn from it. Somewhere along the way, we traded resilience for convenience. We replaced systems that were built to last with systems that only work when everything goes right. And in doing that, we didn't just lose a vegetable. We lost a way of thinking. The forgotten crops of the past weren't special because they were rare or exotic. They were powerful because they were reliable. They didn't depend on perfect conditions, constant inputs, or complex systems. They worked quietly, consistently, and in harmony with the environment. And that's the part that still matters today. Because the real lesson isn't about bringing one specific vegetable back into your garden. It's about understanding why it worked in the first place. It's about recognizing that strength in a food system doesn't come from control. It comes from adaptability. When you start to see it this way, everything changes. Gardening stops being about perfection and starts being about resilience. Food stops being something you rely on others for and becomes something you understand, something you participate in. And suddenly, the past doesn't feel outdated. It feels like a guide. Right now, more people than ever are questioning the way food works. Rising costs, uncertainty, and a growing disconnect from nature are pushing people to look for alternatives. But the answers aren't always new. Sometimes they've been buried for generations. The idea that a single, simple crop could support entire civilizations might sound surprising at first. But maybe what's even more surprising is how easily we let that knowledge disappear. So the next time you think about food, don't just ask what's available. Ask what's missing. Because hidden in that question is the possibility of rediscovering something powerful. Something that doesn't just feed you, but changes the way you see the world around you. If this video made you think differently, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. What's one forgotten idea you think deserves to come back? Because sometimes the future isn't about moving forward. It's about remembering what we left behind.